The city was already alive when the first rays of sunlight slipped between the tall glass towers. Chicago, a city of endless movement, never truly rested. The rumble of buses, the blare of car horns, and the constant shuffle of feet across sidewalks created a rhythm of its own. One that reminded you that here, time was money, and no one could afford to waste either. Amid this restless tide of people, two very different lives were beginning their day, unknowingly moving toward a single moment that would change both of them forever. On one side of the city, in a small one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, Marcus Carter laced up his worn-out boots. He was a tall black man in his late 20s, his broad shoulders making the tiny room feel even smaller. His eyes carried the weariness of someone who had been fighting battles most people couldn't see. Yet, behind that tiredness, there was fire, an unshaken determination that refused to die. Marcus was a mechanic. To the outside world, that was all he was. A man with grease-stained hands, working endless hours in a cramped neighborhood auto shop, barely making enough to cover rent. What people didn't see was the truth he rarely shared. Marcus wasn't just a mechanic by trade. He was an engineer by education. A degree holder, a dreamer, someone who had walked into corporate interviews with hope in his chest, only to walk out with rejection papers in his hands. Time and time again, doors had closed on him. Not because of a lack of talent, but because of something as simple and as cruel as the color of his skin. But Marcus was stubborn. Cars had been his love since childhood. If he wasn't allowed to build them in shining laboratories or lead teams in high-rise offices, then he would repair them in dusty garages and on cracked pavements. His hands, skilled and steady, could feel the heartbeat of an engine the way a doctor feels for a pulse. Even if the world mocked him, Marcus refused to let go of the one thing that made him feel alive. That morning, though, he was running late. His boss at the shop wasn't kind about punctuality, and Marcus couldn't afford to lose even a single shift. Adjusting the strap of his worn leather bag, he stepped out, his long strides eating up the sidewalk as he hurried toward the train that would take him across the city. On the other side of Chicago, another day was unfolding very differently. Victoria Hayes, 31 years old, walked briskly through her modern downtown apartment, heels clicking against polished hardwood floors. Her clothes were sharp, precise, just like her hair tied neatly at the back. Every detail was intentional. Victoria was a mechanical engineer, one of the youngest department leads in her company. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had climbed the ladder quickly and wasn't afraid to remind others of it. Her colleagues admired her brilliance, but many whispered about her arrogance. She had little patience for mistakes, less tolerance for what she called mediocrity, and a sharp tongue that cut down anyone she believed stood below her. Success had polished her image, but it had also hardened her heart. That morning, she was running late too. An important meeting waited at her firm, one that could shape the direction of her career even further. She grabbed her keys, slid into her sleek silver sedan, and started the engine. The car purred to life, and she pulled out into the busy Chicago streets, confident as always, certain that nothing could slow her down. But life, in its strange way, had other plans. A few miles into her drive, in the middle of a crowded intersection, her car jerked and sputtered. The wheel stiffened, the engine coughed like it was choking on its own breath, and then, silence. Her heart sank. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. The car sat lifeless, a helpless block of metal amid honking horns and impatient drivers swerving around her. Victoria clenched her jaw, heat rising in her cheeks. Of all days, it had to be today. Quickly, she stepped out, straightened her blazer, and popped the hood. The morning air was sharp against her face, but she ignored it, leaning over the engine with a practiced eye. She wasn't just some average driver who needed a tow truck. She was an engineer. This was her world. Machines were supposed to obey her. Minutes ticked away as she poked, checked, adjusted. But the car remained silent, stubborn. Sweat dotted her forehead. Each second felt heavier than the last. She had no time for this. No willingness to admit she might need help. And just then, not far down the street, Marcus Carter was making his way past the crowd of stalled traffic, his steps faster than usual. He glanced up, his eyes catching sight of a tall, sharply dressed woman bent over the hood of a car, frustration painted across her face. For a moment he looked away, willing himself to keep walking. He had no time. He had no energy for someone else's problems. But something tugged at him. A voice deep inside that refused to let him ignore what he saw. After all, how many times had he stood in that exact place, helpless against something broken? With a sigh, Marcus slowed his pace. His day was about to change, and so was hers. The horns blared louder. Drivers leaned out of their windows, shouting words Victoria refused to acknowledge. She waved one or two of them past, her jaw tight, her pride even tighter. She was not going to look helpless. Not here, not in the middle of the street, not when she was supposed to be walking into a boardroom with her head held high. Her hands moved quickly, pulling at wires, checking the battery, tapping at components as though sheer confidence could bring them back to life. She muttered under her breath, "Come on. I know this. I know this." But the car didn't move. The silence mocked her. Every minute that passed chipped at her composure. For someone like Victoria Hayes, admitting defeat was harder than the problem itself. She was a mechanical engineer, for heaven's sake. Engines were supposed to be her language. Yet here she was, stuck, while the city flowed around her like she was nothing more than an inconvenient stone in the middle of a rushing river. Sweat gathered at her temples despite the cool breeze. She straightened, glancing at her watch, then back at the hood. The meeting was slipping further out of reach with every passing second. She considered calling roadside assistance, but the thought of waiting, even worse, the thought of showing up late because she couldn't handle her own machine, was unbearable. "No," she whispered fiercely. "I'll figure it out." Across the street, Marcus Carter slowed his pace, his eyes drawn back to the scene. The tall woman in the tailored suit was clearly out of her depth, though she'd never admit it. He could see the frustration in the stiff line of her shoulders, the way her movements grew sharper, less precise. Marcus had seen that look 100 times before. People who thought they could outsmart a machine but didn't know when to step back. His instincts as a mechanic kicked in immediately. He could already guess the issue by the sound the engine made before it died. A few minutes of work, maybe less, and he could have her car back on the road. But he hesitated. This woman didn't look like the kind who welcomed help, especially from someone like him. Grease on his shirt collar, dirt on his boots, carrying himself with the weight of struggle she'd likely never known. Marcus tightened his grip on his bag strap, urging himself forward. "Not today," he muttered. He had his own problems, his own deadlines. Getting involved with strangers was a luxury he couldn't afford. But as he passed closer, the image of her bending over the hood, biting back anger, pulled him back again. He had always been that man who couldn't turn away when something broken needed fixing. Whether it was a car, a moment, or a life. With a quiet sigh, Marcus stopped. He adjusted his stride and walked toward her. "Ma'am," he said calmly, his voice steady, respectful. "Looks like you're having some trouble. I'm a mechanic. I can take a look if you want." Victoria barely glanced at him. Her hands remained busy inside the engine as she answered coldly, "I don't need help." Her tone was clipped, the kind that ended conversations before they began. Marcus nodded, unfazed. "I get that, but it looks like you're pressed for time. Won't take me long." That made her pause. Slowly, she turned her head to really look at him. The tall black man standing there, dressed in a faded work shirt and worn boots, didn't fit into her world. His presence seemed out of place beside her sleek sedan. And in that pause, her pride surged again, stronger than her logic. "You're a mechanic?" she said, almost laughing under her breath. "If I, a qualified engineer, can't figure this out, what makes you think someone like you can?" Her words carried more weight than she realized. To her, it was dismissal. To Marcus, it was familiar. He'd heard variations of that all his life. People doubting him before he even tried, judging him before he spoke, assuming his worth without ever seeing his work. The sting was there, but he'd long since learned not to let it cut too deep. He offered a small shrug. "Sometimes it's not about the degree. Sometimes it's just about knowing the sound an engine makes when it's crying for help." Victoria scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Cute line. But no thank you. I don't need a street-side lecture." Marcus could have walked away right then. Most people would have. But there was something about the stubbornness in her voice, the same stubbornness he carried within himself. He couldn't resist testing it. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but maybe not. Let me just try. Worst case, you lose 5 minutes. Best case, you make your meeting on time." Victoria leaned against the side of the car, crossing her arms, her patience thinning. She looked him up and down, her smirk sharp. "You know what? If it entertains you, go ahead. But let's make this interesting. This car can't be fixed, not here, not now. If I couldn't do it, there's no chance you can." Her eyes glinted with arrogance as she added, almost mocking herself as much as him. "In fact, if you do fix it, I'll admit you're more talented than me. More than that, I'll marry you." Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the absurdity of the challenge. He couldn't tell if she was serious or just trying to humiliate him further, but the corner of his lips curved upward slightly. He didn't need her promise. He didn't even want it. What he wanted was the chance to prove, not to her, but to himself, that talent wasn't something the world could keep buried forever. "All right," Marcus said, his voice calm but certain. "You've got yourself a deal." Victoria rolled her eyes again, as if the whole thing were beneath her. But deep inside, a small, unacknowledged seed of doubt had already been planted. And as Marcus set his bag down and rolled up his sleeves, the battle lines between pride and patience, arrogance and humility, had been drawn. The city's noise carried on around them. Honking horns, impatient voices, the shuffle of hurried feet. But in that small corner of the street, time seemed to slow. Marcus laid his bag gently on the ground and leaned over the open hood, his hands steady, his eyes sharp. For him, this wasn't just a machine. It was a puzzle, one he had solved countless times before, one that spoke to him in a language few understood. Victoria stood a few steps back, arms crossed, her heels clicking against the pavement as she shifted impatiently. She watched him with narrowed eyes, the corners of her lips tilted upward in a mocking smile. She had no intention of believing this man could do what she had failed to do. In her mind, she was giving him rope, and he was about to hang himself with it. "So," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "what's the plan, mechanic? You're going to whisper sweet words to the engine and hope it wakes up?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He adjusted a wire, checked a connection, and ran his fingers across a section of the engine that she had overlooked in her rush. Finally, he said calmly, "Engines talk if you listen close enough. You just have to stop thinking you're smarter than the machine." "I don't have to listen. I understand how machines work. I studied for years, earned my degree, proved myself in rooms full of men who underestimated me. You think your experience with grease and wrenches puts you on the same level as me?" Her words were sharp, and they hit their mark, but Marcus only smiled faintly. He had heard sharper words before. He had endured worse judgments. Compared to years of rejection letters and interviews that ended the moment he walked through the door, this was nothing. "I'm not trying to be on your level," Marcus said simply, as he tightened a bolt. I'm just trying to fix the car. Something in his tone made her pause for the briefest second. But pride was quick to flood back in. You're wasting your time. That engine needs more than a street repair. Marcus crouched lower, examining the underside of the car. He slipped down onto his back, sliding partly beneath it, his shirt collecting dust and grime from the road. Victoria wrinkled her nose. You're really going to get dirty under there? In the middle of traffic? Do you even know what you're looking for? Marcus's voice floated out from beneath the car. Every problem has a source. You don't fix the noise, you fix what's making it. Her patience wore thinner. She tapped at her watch, shaking her head. I can't believe I agreed to this. You're wasting my morning, and honestly, I don't have the time for. A sudden metallic click interrupted her words. Marcus slid out from under the car, his hands blackened, but his expression calm, confident. He leaned back into the hood, adjusting one last connection. Then, without a word, he gestured for her to try the ignition. Victoria raised her brows. Already? That was fast. You didn't even... She cut herself off with a laugh. Fine, let's prove this. When it doesn't start, maybe then you'll see what I meant. She slid into the driver's seat, pressed the key into the ignition, and turned. For a breathless moment, the engine hesitated. Then it roared to life, smooth, steady, powerful. The sound filled the street, silencing the honks around them. It was as if the car itself had chosen to side with Marcus. Victoria's eyes widened, her fingers tightening around the wheel. She turned the ignition off, then back on. The engine purred again, obedient, alive. A flush rose in her cheeks. Not from victory, but from something she wasn't used to feeling: disbelief. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag from his bag, his movements unhurried. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't need to. The car running smoothly was proof enough. You might want to get that checked properly when you have time, he said evenly. It was a small issue, but if left alone, it could have caused real damage. Victoria stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement. She stared at him for a moment, as though searching for the trick, the cheat, the hidden answer. How? She began, then quickly stopped herself. Pride rushed back to replace curiosity. She straightened her blazer and lifted her chin. Well, you got lucky. That's all. Marcus let the words roll past him like rain on glass. He had heard them before, from teachers, from employers, from people who couldn't admit that his skill was real. Maybe, he said simply, or maybe not. She folded her arms again, trying to mask the unease rising in her chest. The challenge she had thrown so carelessly just minutes ago now loomed in her mind, heavy and ridiculous. If you fix it, I'll marry you. She had never expected him to succeed. Now that he had, she wanted nothing more than to forget she'd ever said it. But forgetting wasn't so easy. As Marcus packed up his tools and slung his bag over his shoulder, he gave her a polite nod. Good luck with your meeting. And with that, he began walking away, his long strides carrying him back into the crowd. Victoria watched him go, her chest tightening in a way she didn't understand. Something about his calmness unsettled her. His ability to endure her words without anger, his focus on the car rather than on proving himself, his refusal to demand recognition even when he had earned it. She didn't know why, but it stayed with her long after the sound of the engine faded into the city's hum. For the first time in a long while, Victoria Hayes was left speechless. And Marcus Carter, the man she had mocked as just a mechanic, had walked away with something she hadn't expected to give, her respect, whether she admitted it or not. The engine's steady hum echoed in Victoria's ears even after Marcus disappeared into the crowd. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the dashboard, her hands frozen on the steering wheel. The car, which had refused to obey her, now purred like it had never been broken. It was humiliating, unexplainable. And then there was the echo of her own voice, reckless words she had thrown at him in arrogance. "If you fix it, I'll marry you." At the time, it had been nothing more than mockery, a way to shut him down. But now that the car was running, the challenge she had set burned like a brand in her memory. She shook her head sharply, as though she could dislodge the thought. "Ridiculous," she muttered, slamming the door shut. "It doesn't mean anything. He just got lucky." But no matter how she tried to dismiss it, the unease clung to her. She drove off, weaving through traffic, forcing her focus back to the meeting ahead. Yet the polished words she had prepared, the confident presentation she had rehearsed, all slipped away like sand through her fingers. Her mind kept returning to that tall man with calm eyes and grease-stained hands, the man who had endured her arrogance without flinching. Marcus, meanwhile, hurried down the street toward the shop, his bag heavy on his shoulder but his heart surprisingly light. Encounters like that weren't new to him. He was used to being underestimated, mocked, or dismissed before he was given a chance. But something about the woman's words lingered. Not the insult. He had grown numb to those, but the way she had been so certain, so unwilling to believe anyone could be better than her. As his boots hit the pavement, memories he usually kept buried rose uninvited. He saw himself years earlier, walking into a shining glass building for his first big interview. He had worn the best suit he could afford, one a size too tight but pressed carefully. His resume was strong. Top of his class, practical projects that had impressed his professors, recommendations that spoke of his brilliance. He had walked into that room with hope swelling in his chest. But the moment the panel of interviewers looked up and saw him, their eyes shifted, their smiles stiffened, and as the questions came, he felt the weight of their judgment. Not on his answers, not on his skills, but on the skin he wore and the assumptions that came with it. A week later, the rejection letter arrived. Then another, and another. Marcus tried again and again, each time walking into those rooms with fresh hope, each time walking out with a little less of it left. Eventually, the jobs offered to him weren't engineering roles at all. They were assistant positions, entry-level tasks, far below what he had earned. It was clear to him what the world was saying. You don't belong here. So he chose another path. If they wouldn't let him build cars, he would fix them. If they wouldn't let him stand in the offices above, he would work with his hands in the streets below. It wasn't the life he had dreamed of, but it was honest. It kept him close to the machines he loved. And in time, he wore their judgments like a second skin, no longer letting them pierce as deeply. Yet, every time someone dismissed him as just a mechanic, a small voice inside whispered the truth. I am more than they see. Back in her office, Victoria sat stiffly at the head of the conference table. The meeting unfolded around her, charts and figures flashing on screens, colleagues nodding in agreement. She answered questions, presented her ideas, and spoke with her usual precision. But beneath the polished exterior, her mind replayed the scene on the roadside. The man's calmness, his refusal to rise to her bait, the way he had fixed what she couldn't in less time than it had taken her to admit defeat. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake in her modern apartment, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled. Who was he? She wondered. Where had he learned that skill? Why did he seem so unfazed by me? It unsettled her because she was used to being the smartest, the most capable in any room. Yet a stranger, someone she had mocked and dismissed, had quietly shown her up. And worse, he hadn't even demanded credit. He had walked away as though the victory meant nothing to him. For someone like Victoria Hayes, that kind of humility was unfamiliar. It was foreign, and it gnawed at her. Marcus, on the other hand, thought little more of the encounter as the days passed. For him, it had been one more engine, one more problem solved. His struggles were bigger than one stranger's arrogance. His rent was still due, his hours still long, his dreams still shelved in the shadows of rejection. But destiny, it seemed, had no intention of letting the two paths drift apart. Because while Marcus tried to forget, Victoria found herself doing the opposite. She thought of him in the middle of the night, during her morning coffee, even in the quiet moments between meetings. It was as though his presence had left a mark on her pride, one she couldn't scrub away. Eventually, she decided she needed to know more. Not out of kindness, not even out of guilt, but out of a restless curiosity that refused to let her be. She began to ask questions, make calls, and search the corners of the city where men like Marcus lived and worked. What she would find, however, would shake her more than the breakdown of any machine. The city had a way of hiding people. Men like Marcus walked its streets every day, their stories tucked beneath the roar of traffic and the glitter of wealth. For most, they were invisible, easy to overlook, easy to dismiss, but not for Victoria anymore. It began innocently enough. A passing thought here, a half-hearted internet search there. But curiosity, once sparked, has a way of growing restless. Soon, she found herself lingering over the memory of his steady hands, the quiet authority in the way he had handled the car. She couldn't shake it. She didn't want to admit it, but she needed to know more. So she asked around. Her assistant raised an eyebrow when she casually described, "A tall man, dark skin, works on cars." The assistant shrugged. New York was full of such men. But Victoria persisted. She reached out to acquaintances, called a few repair shops, even drove past streets she had never thought to visit before. And one evening, she found him. The shop was small, tucked between a laundromat and a grocery store with flickering neon lights. A weathered sign hung above the door, its paint chipped and fading. Through the open garage bay, she saw Marcus bent over the hood of an old sedan, his arms deep in the engine. His shirt was stained, his brow damp, yet there was a calm rhythm to his work, as if each motion was part of a song only he could hear. She stayed in her car longer than she intended, watching. There was no rush in him, no arrogance, no need to prove himself to anyone. He worked with the patience of a man who understood that machines, like people, had their own way of revealing what ailed them. For a woman who thrived in boardrooms and high-rise offices, this quiet corner of the city felt like another world, and she hated how much it intrigued her. Inside the garage, Marcus tightened the last bolt and lowered the hood with a soft click. The customer, an older woman with worry in her eyes, clutched her purse nervously. "I don't have much," she admitted, her voice low. Marcus gave her a small smile. "Pay what you can," he said, handing back her keys. Her relief was immediate, tears brimming as she pressed a few worn bills into his hand. "Bless you, son," she whispered. Marcus nodded, pocketed the money without counting it, and watched her drive away. It wasn't the first time he had taken less than what was fair, and it wouldn't be the last. Some nights, he wondered if his generosity was weakness. But deep down, he knew he couldn't be any other way. Life had been hard enough for him. Why should he make it harder for someone else? Victoria finally stepped out of her car. The sound of her heels on the pavement cut sharply through the night air. Marcus glanced up, surprised to see the woman from the roadside standing at the edge of his world. "You?" he said simply, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you here?" he asked, his tone even. She hesitated, unprepared for the question. What was she doing here? She hadn't planned a speech, hadn't rehearsed a reason. All she had was a gnawing curiosity that had driven her across the city. "I wanted to see," she began, then stopped. The words felt foreign, heavy in her mouth. "I wanted to understand." Marcus tilted his head, studying her. "Understand what?" She gestured vaguely to the shop, the tools, the grease under his fingernails. "This, you, how someone like you." She caught herself, realizing too late how the words sounded. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned, picked up a wrench, and set it neatly back in its place on the wall. Only then did he look at her again. "People like me?" he asked quietly. Victoria flushed. She wasn't used to being caught off guard. She wasn't used to being the one fumbling for words. "That's not what I meant." "Maybe it is," Marcus said. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried a weight that settled between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city outside filled the silence. The buzz of neon, the laughter of passers-by, the distant wail of a siren. Then Marcus sighed, wiping his hands again, his expression softening. "You want to understand? Fine. Come back tomorrow. Spend a day here. See what it's really like." Victoria blinked. "You're inviting me?" "I'm challenging you," Marcus corrected. That night, back in her apartment, Victoria stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked the same: perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, expensive silk blouse. But something beneath the surface had shifted. Why had she agreed to go back? Why had she even followed him in the first place? It wasn't pity, she told herself. It wasn't guilt. It was something else. Something she couldn't yet name. Meanwhile, Marcus locked up the shop, the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders. He didn't know why he had invited her. Maybe part of him wanted her to really see what it meant to live his life. Or maybe, deep down, he wanted to prove something, not to her but to himself. Either way, their worlds had collided once, and now they were on the verge of colliding again. This time, neither of them would walk away unchanged. Morning sunlight spilled across the city, golden against the steel and glass towers, but the neighborhood where Marcus worked looked different under its glow. The streets were worn, cracked with time, lined with mom-and-pop stores struggling to stay alive. It wasn't the world Victoria was used to. The polished lobbies, spotless sidewalks, and valet parking. Here, every corner told a story of survival. She arrived earlier than she expected, parking her sleek car across from the garage. For a moment, she considered driving away, telling herself this was a mistake. But Marcus's words from the night before echoed in her mind. "Come back tomorrow. See what it's really like." So she stepped out. Marcus was already at work. He wore the same faded coveralls she had seen before, a wrench in hand, his movements steady and sure. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would," she replied, folding her arms across her chest, as though bracing herself. "Then let's get started." The first customer of the day was a young mother whose car refused to start. She carried a toddler on her hip, the child restless and fussy, while she explained the problem. Marcus listened patiently, crouching so his eyes met hers. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll take care of it." Victoria watched from the side, expecting him to rattle off a price, but he didn't. Instead, he opened the hood, worked quickly, and within minutes the engine sputtered to life. The woman's relief was visible. She pressed a handful of crumpled bills into his hand. "It's all I have," she murmured. Marcus shook his head. "It's enough. Use the rest for your little one." The woman's eyes filled with gratitude. She thanked him again and again before driving away. Victoria stood frozen. This wasn't the transaction she was used to in her world, where time was money and compassion rarely entered the equation. She felt a strange knot forming in her chest. The day moved forward, each customer bringing their own burdens. A delivery driver worried about making his rounds, an older man who needed his truck for work, a student trying to keep her beat-up car alive just long enough to graduate. And in each case, Marcus treated them with the same dignity, the same respect. He charged fairly, sometimes less, never more. He explained things with patience, even when people didn't understand the first time. Victoria found herself stepping closer, asking questions she never thought she would ask. "Why don't you charge more?" she asked during a quiet moment. Marcus shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because they can't pay more." "But you need money, don't you?" she pressed. He gave a small laugh. "Money isn't the only measure of worth. Besides, I get by." It was such a simple answer, but it unsettled her deeply. In her world, success was measured by numbers on a spreadsheet, by promotions, by recognition. Yet here was a man who seemed content with far less, and somehow richer for it. As the hours passed, Marcus showed her more than just cars. He showed her resilience. He showed her patience. He showed her a kind of strength she had never seen in boardrooms or at conferences. She noticed the way his eyes lit up when he solved a problem, the way his hands moved with confidence born from years of practice. She noticed the respect people gave him, not out of fear or status, but out of genuine trust. For the first time in years, Victoria felt small. Not because she was less capable, but because she realized how narrow her view of the world had been. By late afternoon, she was exhausted. Her designer shoes were scuffed, her blouse clung to her skin, and the smell of grease lingered in her hair. She had never worked a day like this in her life. And yet, she couldn't deny the strange sense of clarity settling in her. As the sun dipped low, Marcus closed the garage door and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Well?" he asked. Victoria hesitated, searching for words. She wasn't used to admitting weakness, let alone admiration. Finally, she exhaled. "I misjudged you," she said quietly. Marcus studied her, his face unreadable. "You thought I was just a mechanic," he said. "I thought you were less," she admitted. The words stung even as she said them. "But you're more than I realized." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed around them, alive with its endless rhythm. Then Marcus gave a small nod. "Good," he said. "Now you see." That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She lay in her luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. His patience, his kindness, his quiet strength. And she asked herself the question she had avoided for too long. What really makes someone worthy? The following evening, Victoria returned to the garage. She told herself it was curiosity again, but she knew better. Something about Marcus had unsettled her, pulled her closer. She had seen his world, yes, but she hadn't seen him. Not fully. When she arrived, the shop was quiet, the last car already gone. Marcus sat on a stool near the back, a mug of coffee in his hand, the kind of weariness in his eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. "You came back," he said, not surprised. "I did," she replied softly. "You said yesterday, now you see. But I feel like I don't see everything yet." Marcus leaned back, studying her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if making a decision. "Sit down," he said, pulling over another stool. "You want to know? Fine. But don't expect it to be easy to hear." For a long moment, he was silent, staring at the floor as though pulling memories up from the dust. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but each word carried weight. "I wasn't always a mechanic. I studied engineering. Same as you." Victoria's eyes widened, but she held her tongue. "I worked harder than I thought possible. Long nights, no sleep, juggling classes and part-time jobs just to pay tuition. When I graduated, I thought everything would change. I thought the doors would finally open." He gave a bitter laugh. But every interview ended the same. Smiles, polite words, and then rejection. Over and over again. Sometimes they told me I was underqualified. Other times they said the position had been filled. But you learn to hear what they don't say out loud. He met her eyes then, and she felt the weight of his silence. "They saw my skin before they saw my skills." The words hit her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing there was nothing she could say to erase the truth of his experience. Marcus continued. I kept trying. I knocked on every door, sent out applications until my hands cramped from typing. And when I finally got offers, they were for jobs beneath what I was trained for. Assistant roles, menial work, nothing that matched what I'd worked for. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled slightly into fists. I watched classmates, men and women with less experience, less passion, walk into opportunities one could only dream of. Why? Because they fit the picture better. Victoria's chest tightened. She thought of the arrogance she had carried on the roadside, mocking him, belittling him. The memory burned now, shame rising in her throat. What did you do? She asked softly. Marcus gave a small shrug. What I had to. I couldn't waste my life waiting for people to see me as equal. Cars were always my passion, so I opened this shop. It wasn't the dream I had in college, but at least here, no one can deny me my work. Engines don't care about the color of your skin. A machine either runs or it doesn't. There was a pause, heavy and thick with unspoken things. Then Marcus leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. You mocked me because you thought I was just some uneducated mechanic. But this, he gestured around the shop. This isn't all I am. This is survival. These are my broken chains. Victoria swallowed hard, fighting the knot in her throat. For the first time in her life, she felt small not because of her failures, but because of her ignorance. I didn't know, she whispered. Of course you didn't, Marcus replied, his tone calm, not accusing. Most people like you don't. You don't have to. The world isn't built to make you see. The truth of his words sank deep. She thought of the offices she walked into every day, the boardrooms where everyone looked like her. She thought of how quickly she had dismissed him, not just because of his clothes or his job, but because of what he represented in her mind. And she hated herself for it. The silence stretched between them until Marcus finally spoke again, softer this time. I'm not telling you this for pity. I don't need that. I'm telling you because you wanted to understand. Victoria nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I do, and I want to do better. For the first time, Marcus allowed a faint smile. Then start by seeing me. Not just here, not just today. See the man, not the shadow. That night, Victoria left the garage with her heart heavy and her mind racing. She had built her career on precision, on numbers, on facts. But no equation could solve the weight of what she had just heard. Marcus's story wasn't just his own. It was the story of countless others. And now that she had heard it, she couldn't unhear it. She drove home in silence, the city lights blurring through her windshield, knowing that nothing, absolutely nothing, would feel the same again. The morning after Marcus shared his story, Victoria sat in her office, staring at the skyline through the glass walls. Normally, the view energized her, the endless stretch of steel and ambition reflecting everything she had worked for. But today it felt hollow. The board meeting droned on around her. Words like profit margins and expansion strategies filled the air. But her thoughts were elsewhere, back in that small garage, with its cracked floors and oil-stained rags, where a man had taught her more about dignity than years of schooling ever had. By the time the meeting ended, she had made a decision. That evening, she returned to the garage. Marcus was there, as always, finishing up with a customer. When he noticed her, his brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing until the car drove off. You again, he said, wiping his hands. Didn't think I'd see you so soon. Victoria took a deep breath. I came to apologize, properly this time, for everything, the things I said, the way I treated you. It was wrong. Marcus studied her face, searching for insincerity. Finding none, he gave a slow nod. Apology accepted. But Victoria wasn't done. I also came because I can't stop thinking about what you told me. about how the world shut its doors on you. She stepped closer, her voice steady. You deserve better, Marcus. You deserve the chance you were denied. He raised an eyebrow. And you think you can give me that? I know I can, she replied. There's an opening at my company, a position you're more than qualified for. I can make sure your application isn't ignored this time. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he chuckled softly, shaking his head. So you're here to rescue me? Her cheeks flushed. No. I'm here to give you what you earned. What you should have had all along. Marcus leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. And what if I don't want it? The question startled her. Why wouldn't you? He glanced around the shop, the tools, the half-finished cars, the faded sign above the door. Because this is mine. Every inch of it. No one can take it away from me. Out there, he nodded toward the glittering skyline beyond the street. They can close their doors again. Here, I make my own. Victoria fell silent. She hadn't expected that answer. But, Marcus continued, his tone softening, I'll consider it. Not because I need saving, but because maybe, just maybe, it's time to remind them what they overlooked. The air between them shifted. For the first time, Victoria felt not superiority, not shame, but something new, respect. She smiled faintly. Then at least let me help you get your foot in the door. The rest, you'll handle on your own. Marcus gave a small nod. That I can agree to. The days that followed brought changes neither of them had planned. Marcus interviewed, this time with Victoria quietly making sure his resume wasn't buried at the bottom of a pile. His knowledge and experience spoke for themselves, leaving the panel no choice but to acknowledge what had been invisible before. And when the offer finally came, a position worthy of his skill, Marcus accepted with quiet pride. Victoria celebrated not with champagne or grand speeches, but with a simple visit to the garage. She found him cleaning tools the way he always did at the end of the day. You did it, she said softly. No, he corrected, meeting her eyes. We did it. Over time, their paths intertwined more often. What began as tension grew into friendship, one forged in honesty, struggle, and newfound understanding. Victoria found herself looking forward to their conversations, drawn not to the arrogance she once clung to, but to the humility and strength she now admired. And Marcus, though cautious, began to see in her not just the woman who had mocked him on the roadside, but someone willing to grow, to listen, to change. One evening, as they walked out of the shop together, the city glowing under the setting sun, Victoria glanced at him with a small smile. You know, she said lightly, I once promised I'd marry you if you fixed my car. Marcus laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that made her heart skip. And I did fix it. True, she admitted, her smile widening. So what now? He looked at her, his eyes warm but steady. Now we take it one road at a time. They didn't know where that road would lead, friendship, partnership, maybe even love. But for the first time, both of them were willing to find out. Because sometimes the most unexpected detours lead to the most important destinations.